I believe that every human being with a physically normal brain can learn a great deal and be surprisingly intellectual. I believe that what we badly need is social approval of learning and social rewards for learning. Isaac Asimov, American writer and professor. All right. Good morning, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. You know, recently there was a headline, several actually, suggesting that if you were engaging in the act of intermittent fasting, that you would increase your risk of heart disease. You would have some problems with your heart. Like, what? What in the world? Like, that seems counter to everything that we've ever read, right? So, what I've decided to do was to talk about it. We went and dug up that information, the source material. Here on the Liberty Dad podcast, we believe that, as the quote today suggests, or outright says, you can learn a lot just by reading. So, we're going to dig that up. But because I'm challenging the knowledge, the powerhouse of people with multiple letters behind their name, figured I better bring him back up. And just like when you take vitamins, if one is good, two is better, obviously. Well, then, if one podcaster is good, then two must be better. So joining me today is going to be Kyle Matovick from the Liberty and Health podcast. So let's give a warm welcome to Kyle. Good, sir. How are you?
Excellent, Dio. Good morning. I'm stoked to be here with you again.
Awesome. This is great. We're going to go through and we're going to talk about whether or not you'll kill yourself by not eating so much.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating topic and one that used to be of great interest to me. It still is, but I no longer practice fasting. But my personal opinion, I guess, right out of the gate is that I believe it's a viable way for people to lose weight if that's what they choose to do. But much like most other things in life, a lot of dietary tools and tips are meant to be just that, tools and tips, not necessarily guidelines or strict rules to abide by. So I'm excited to cover this topic because I think there's a lot of information and nuance around here that doesn't get quite captured in these clickbait headlines.
Right. So what we're going to do is, here's the headline. We'll pull that headline right up on the screen there so that people can see it, and we'll dig right in. All right, there we go. Let's see. Is that how we want? Yeah, that works. I think. I thought there was another. Let's see, check it out. Nope, that's not what we want. I think I messed it all up. Nope, that's not. Let's start this over. Let's try it again. Let's get Kyle back in here. All right. It's been a while since I've had a guest on, so the controls, and I thought there was one where I had the the headline a little bit bigger so that people can read it, but whatever, this will do.
Brush the dust
All right.
off. Yeah.
All right. So intermittent fasting linked to higher risk of cardiovascular death. Research suggests a new analysis challenges the notion that restricting eating to a limited window of time is good for heart health. Wow, that sounds pretty scary, folks. Like you better eat all day long so that you don't die early, right? Well, we're going to get into that. Before we do, let's go ahead and pull up the on here they have a video. We're going to click. We're going to go through the video here. But let's just kind of read it real quick. Intermittent fasting, a diet pattern that involves alternating between periods of fasting and eating, can lower blood pressure and help some people lose weight, past research has indicated. But in an analysis presented Monday at the American Heart Association scientific sessions in Chicago, challenges the notion that intermittent fasting is good for heart health. Instead, researchers from, and I'm going to butcher all of this, folks, but whatever, we're going to give it a shot. Good old college try. Shanghai Jiao Tong University School of Medicine in China found that people who restricted food consumption to less than 8 hours per day had a 91% higher risk of dying from cardiovascular disease over a median period of 8 years relative to people who ate across 12 to 16 hours. 91% sounds like a whole lot, folks.
Mhm.
However, keep in mind, what was the original percent, right? Like it's like 91% higher, but what was as compared to what? And so what was the percentage beforehand? So like, think of it this way for easy math, because it's 7 a.m., folks. If they say your risk doubles, then what was the original risk? If the
Right.
original risk was 0.5% and it doubles, it is now 1%,
Mhm.
which means it's pretty low. Or yeah,
So
did I say that right? I think I said that right. 0.5. Yeah,
y-
0.5%.
yeah, the number one killer of people worldwide currently is heart disease. But it's interesting that they kind of said over a median period of 8 years, because what heart disease isn't necessarily something that you develop when you're young, based on a lot of research that I read and that I understand.
Mhm.
Um, and there have been lots of recent studies, I think, past like 2012, where they started to dive into what's called Mendelian randomization, where they pair up people who have this very, very similar phenotypes and track them over a lifetime. And what they find is that people with a higher LDL cholesterol have more heart disease than people who have a lower LDL cholesterol.
Right.
You can't track that over the course of 8 years. You have to track that over a lifetime.
Right.
So now, if I had to guess, and once again, this is pure speculation, because my understanding is that they never published a study. This still has to go to peer review and then kind of be, all finalized before it's even published data. This is just kind
Right.
of like a perspective that this person kind of took some data and found, extrapolated his own takeaways from it. Um, you once again, you'd have to look at a lifetime exposure of LDL cholesterol over a lifetime. But what he may be doing is that over the course of these 8 years, is that maybe he didn't account for calories or anything like that, and found that people who, let's say, did do intermittent fasting but had a high saturated fat diet, maybe, or just didn't live overall healthy lifestyles, what he may found is that those people who just happened to intermittent fast had also, higher blood markers of LDL cholesterol over the course of 8 years. But that says nothing if they're going to actually die of heart disease, because maybe their lifetime exposure of LDL was lower before, maybe it'll be lower after. We
Mhm.
don't know until they publish the data and kind of explain how their findings are. So it's kind of, I think it's honestly irresponsible for a news outlet to publish this kind of thing and say that, oh, this is linked to that, when the study hasn't been fully published, peer reviewed, and finalized. And this
Right.
could take up to a year to do. So, like I said, I think this is actually pretty irresponsible to come out and say something like this, especially saying that, there's a 91% higher risk of heart disease. Yeah, I think that's hyperbolic and irresponsible.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at the video, and Kyle, just yell at me if you're like, "Hey, stop right here! I want to say something."
Sure.
So we're gonna watch this video. It's about a 3-minute clip, and this comes from NBC News. And so what happens is you have a host, and they brought in a doctor, and then they're like asking the doctor about this, and so I think there's some very insightful things in here, and then we'll
Mhm.
dig in a little bit deeper and see if we, the average Joe, right, can learn a little bit more than even what we hear in this next 3-minute clip. So
Mhm.
let me cue that up. And let's see here. There and bam.
In just the last hour or so, we've got this new study around something that you might have heard of, you might have done, you might be doing yourself, called intermittent fasting, IF. And it finds that it may nearly double the risk of dying from a heart issue. So remember, this is a kind of diet where you only eat like at certain times a day or within a certain time window. This study examined its impact on 20,000 Americans, the whole thing, raising some red flags about what's become a pretty popular way for some folks to try to lose weight. Now, the authors of this study say that fasting for 16 hours or more every day, in their words, significantly increased the risk of some kind of a heart disease-related death. I want to bring in our medical contributor, Dr. Kavita Patel for NBC News here.
Okay, real quick, let's pause it right here.
All right.
One thing that could be a hypothetical mechanism of why these people may be seeing higher heart disease problems as well is also the fact that, like, maybe the people who do intermittent fasting, maybe they don't eat for a longer period of time, and that way when they do eat, they overeat calories, and that causes them to gain weight over a period of time. So, like, a lot of this nuance is kind of left out of here. And actually, this Dr. Patel, I said before we were on air, I think that she actually does a pretty good job of laying out some of the nuance. I don't know anything about her, but just in this clip alone, I think she's pretty reasonable.
Right. So, and she's got a pretty face. So, I mean, you can always trust a pretty face.
Of course.
So that's how I see it, at least. All right, let's continue.
IF, we've covered them. Some of them say no material impact. This one clearly says there's more of a risk. Other studies have said it's actually good for heart health. It reduces inflammation, et cetera. There's a slew of those kinds of studies. How are we supposed to think? A person without a medical degree, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, Hallie. So the most important thing to kind of put in context is it's a presentation at the American Heart Association. That doesn't diminish, but it's not a peer-reviewed journal article quite yet. And there are a lot of caveats to it. The most important caveat is that this was self-reported data on 20,000 people. That's important, but it was based on—
Because that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people, self-reported on about 2 days of their diet.
All right.
So I don't want to keep cutting through this video, but what you said there's actually very, very important, because if you ask anybody, including me, like, I have a journal on my phone. I use Carbon Diet Coach to track all my calories and everything that I do. I couldn't just offhand tell you what I ate last week. I'd probably have to go back through my food log and see, okay, well, I had this day at this time. Most people are not good, judges of how many calories they eat, what they ate, and what the content of that food is. And am I calling people a liar in these food recalls? No, I just think people don't really think about this stuff that deeply. I mean, I'm somebody who's very, very, meticulous when it comes to my nutrition and training. Most people aren't. And that's not like inherently a problem, but when you ask them to recall what they've eaten, that does present an issue, because once again, people don't sit there and weigh out their food. I do it, but most people don't. So when you ask somebody, hey, do you remember how many cups of ribs you've eaten, or, how much pop you've drank recently? Most people probably wouldn't be able to tell you. They might be able to tell you like an average, but for the most part, they're probably not going to remember every last little meal and everything that they ate recently. So, like, these self-reports can be very, very unreliable, especially when it comes to overall reporting of calories. So there was a study done where they actually asked people, how many calories they think they ate, because they thought they had like a slow metabolism. And what they found is that people underreported the amount of calories they ate by like 50% or something like that. So once again, I'm not calling these people liars. I'm just saying most people don't know, and including me. If you had me sit down and, watch everything I ate, I would probably be more accurate than the average person, but I would still probably be nowhere close, if I'm being completely honest.
Right. And I'm trying to remember, I was trying to think if I could remember enough about it. Something that I read a while back, but there was some study where what they did was they did this weird thing. They had a bowl of soup, and they connected the soup from the bottom or something like that. And so as people ate, they kind of kept filling it up a little bit. Not like a huge amount. It's not like you ate half of it and all of a sudden it was full again, but they would just kind of slowly fill it.
Sure.
And the study was kind of done to see, like, and then they asked people, they're like, how much soup did you eat? And people were way off on their guesses of what they literally just ate. Right. And I think this, like, I tell people all the time, like, and I'm not a like a fitness coach of any kind. I'm not, in fact, by the way, folks, just as a disclaimer, nothing here is medical advice. I mean, you need to seek out somebody that's willing to be responsible. We're just having a conversation based on our understanding. So we could be entirely wrong, or we could be entirely correct. since we're podcasters, it's probably the latter. But always a good time for self-deprecation. But I tell people, I'm like, they're like, well, how come I've gained so much weight? And I'm like, do you snack? Like, no. Like, people probably snack like a lot more than they realize. Like, I work from home, and if I'm tracking my food, then I realize, like, wow, I did snack a lot.
Yeah.
I realize how much I'm actually snacking. Whereas when I'm not tracking it, I'll forget that handful of chips that maybe I went and grabbed,
Yeah.
a time or two. I might forget that one cookie that I ate, because I think people tend to remember larger consumptions than they do smaller ones. And if you have
Yeah.
a bunch of smaller ones, you walk past the kitchen, you're like, let me just grab a something here, or something, whatever that something is. Whether it's celery or a cookie, you may just forget about it because it
Yeah.
was small and you just goes under the radar.
So when it comes to like nuts, though, this is something that I think a lot of people miss
Mm,
out on, is that like if you filled up a container like my palm, and I'm about 5'11", my hands are probably average size for like the average guy. If you filled my palm full of macadamia nuts, people have no idea how calorically dense nuts are and how like
right,
unsatiating they are. That would honestly probably be like 300 calories of nuts in your hand. So I mean, you
right,
literally take a handful of nuts and just, down them real quick. You could honestly throw your entire day off easily just by a
right.
handful of nuts without even thinking about it. So it's because they're so high in carbohydrates and fats. Does that mean you like shouldn't eat them? No, I think nuts are a great part of a diet, but just be aware that like they're very calorically dense, and
Right.
make sure you account for that whenever you're doing your overall calories. So I think that's something that a lot of people don't really recognize when it comes to nuts. Like they're very, very calorically dense, and they're very tasty for that reason.
Right. Here's something that people can laugh at me about. You too, Kyle. I actually have an old bottle of wine
Mhm.
that it's got a screw-on lid, and on it I took blue painter's tape, and it literally measures out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 glasses.
Mhm.
And what I'll do when I'm pouring myself a glass of wine, I will literally pour some wine, and then I will stand my empty bottle with the measurements on it next to the new bottle.
Mhm.
And that's how I judge how much wine I drink, because of the same issue. Because I noticed, I was like, why do I not feel so good? I only had, a glass and a half of wine last night. Like, I didn't drink that much, right? I might
Right.
have, because I was cooking dinner and kind of, just chilling. I might have drank it a little faster than if I was at dinner with a bunch of friends where I'm
Mhm.
talking, but I didn't hammer it and I didn't drink that much. Well, as it turned out, once I started, one day I decided to go back and to the bottle that I had opened the night before to take a look. And I realized that I thought I drank 2 glasses, but I actually drank 3 glasses of wine.
Oh,
And I was
right.
like really surprised. And I was like, oh my God, how often does this happen where I'm drinking more? And
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not like hammering it, but if you think you're drinking 2 glasses of wine and you're literally drinking three, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't realize, because what I was doing is I would pour a glass, which was about roughly a glass. But then as I'm going along cooking dinner, or maybe talking to a friend, or
Mhm.
my wife, or, whatever it is that I'm doing that's causing me to be distracted and not focused on how much I'm drinking, then I might pour just a little bit more. Like, oh, I see it's down a little bit. Let me just
Yeah.
pour a little bit more.
Right.
And then before I know it, you know, and I have a healthy tolerance, I suppose. I don't, you don't realize, like, I don't think so I before I knew it, I drank 3 glasses of wine, which is not what I was intending. Right. And so I was
Right.
like, so now I literally measure my wine. Um, when I'm drinking, I hate to say it, it sound like so bad, but when I'm drinking alone, and
Mhm.
what I mean by that is I drink faster when I'm by myself, not like
Mm.
tremendously faster, but faster than I
Yeah.
would if you and 2 other guys came over, we're sitting around bantering and
Right.
talking about politics. Well, because I'm talking, I can't
Mhm.
drink as quickly. So that 2
Right.
glasses may take me, you know, 2 hours, whereas while I'm cooking dinner or something like that, I could go through a little bit faster. So,
Yeah.
but I just thought that's kind of funny. And people can make fun of me
Mhm.
if you want, whatever. I don't drink as much, because when you're 45, 3 glasses of wine can hit a lot harder than when you were 20.
Yeah, well,
So,
no, I definitely noticed that now that I'll be 30 in November. I definitely don't bounce back from a hard night of drinking as well as I did when I was like 20, 21.
right. And when you've got like a 5-year-old and, a 40-hour week job. And then you're
Mm-hmm.
doing podcasting and, I'm trying to do like woodworking and I've got yard work. I have way too much going on to be able to deal with even a minor hangover.
Right,
Like even a
absolutely.
minor one, I'm like, oh man, what in the world? So I can't do
Yeah.
it. Too old. So, all right, let's continue watching this.
Kind of pattern. So I'm not saying that they didn't always follow like an 18-hour off eating and an 6-hour or 16-hour off and an 8-hour eating window. But
and by that you mean people would say, I'm only going to eat from 11 to 7 today, and I'm not going to eat outside of that.
Right. So anytime it's self-reported, you have to take it with a grain of salt. And then number two, we don't know about what these people ate. So for all we know, people were eating pretty bad food, and it doesn't matter when you eat bad food, it's bad for you. So we need to look at the quality of the food and other factors that affect diet.
Okay, but can we make an assessment as medical professionals, which I'm not one, but can there be an assessment made on intermittent fasting? Does it work? Is it good or is it problematic?
Right. So I think for all people, intermittent fasting should be done with personalization. So if I were to walk out and say to every patient who needs to either have a better diet, needs to modify their heart risk factors, you should do intermittent fasting, I would be negligent as a medical doctor. What I should say is, how can we help you eat better? Because Hallie, if it helps you to eat better by only eating in an 8-hour window and you're going to get more fruits and vegetables, it's what you eat, not necessarily when you eat.
Yeah, so right here,
several probably smaller groups.
I really like the point that she made right here, because this is very, very important. And I actually missed this nuance when I was doing the carnivore diet, which I was doing probably 3 or 4 years ago now at this point. Diet is very, very personal. Food is very, very personal. It's also cultural. If you've noticed, one thing I wanted to bring up earlier, but I wanted to let the video play for a little bit longer. Every time you go out to a public event, every time you go to a work event or something like that, or you're with people, we always have food with us. So this is part of the reason why I think, the obesity epidemic is where it's at, is because like we have a whole cultural and societal implications around eating and, and sharing food with people. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. It's what we've done throughout human history. But that also presents the problem that like, we live in a hyperpalatable food environment where, foods are very, very, they're not satiating, and we're able to process foods in a way that make them more palatable and make it harder to stop eating them. Whereas like, back, hundreds of years ago, we didn't have the ability to jam all these oils and processed sugars into a food. So like the processing itself isn't inherently bad. Like I'm a big fan of protein powder because that's a form of good processing where you take out the fats and the carbohydrates and the sugars and the oils to get just a straight up protein. Right. That's good because you're able to raise your protein intake. And we know that having a higher protein intake, leads to greater satiety. And it also allows you to build more lean muscle mass. A form of bad processing would be taking the protein out and adding in lots of oils and sugars and making it more palatable. So that way you eat more calories without getting satiation. And it's not just about satiety when it comes to overeating. There's also, like I said, different societal and cultural implications that you may want to just enjoy food with somebody else. But satiety is a pretty large lever, because if you're full, you're satiated, you're content with what you're eating, you're probably not going to overeat, or at least you're a lot less likely to overeat. But yeah, what she said there is very, very important, because once again, if you don't like the diet that you're doing, you're not going to stick to it. For me, I did the carnivore diet for a few years, and then I figured out, oh, this is no longer serving me. I need to do something else. Now I do much more of a flexible diet, and that works for me, where I can have, some junk food, but I do, mostly center my diet around lean meats, lots of fruits and vegetables, protein powders, and sometimes a little bit of processed food, maybe like Greek yogurt or something like that, to hit my daily macros, and that works for me. But what may work for you, DL, wouldn't work for me, and what may work for me may not work for you. And that's kind of what we need to understand as people who are advocating for healthy lifestyles, is that nutrition and a healthy lifestyle has to be personalized for each person. There's no one size fits all. Carnivore isn't going to work for all people. Keto isn't going to work for all people. Vegan, intermittent fasting, all these approaches are just tools in a toolbox. You have to find the right tool for the job, which can be different from person to person to person.
Right. No, I agree. And what was the point that I wanted to make there? I was thinking about it, and I think I might have lost it. So I don't know if I'm gonna. Oh yeah. I was gonna point out, like, when we have this culture of eating, which we do a lot. I mean, people come to our house all the time, and we're like, here's tons of food, right? It's easier to eat a pile of pretzels, like, than it is to eat a pile of celery and
Yes.
carrots, right? Like you will get you will get full quicker and know you're full quicker off of celery and broccoli and
Mhm.
um, carrots than a bowl of potato chips,
Right.
right? And I think that's, when we get together with people, we tend to get together with a lot of processed
Exactly.
foods where you
Right.
can easily overeat.
Mhm.
And you don't even necessarily realize it. You ate more sugar or carbohydrates or whatever it is, than you might have otherwise eaten if you were eating what more like natural foods,
Right.
whole foods and whatnot. So I think that's part of the issue that we have to balance out in our daily lives. Like,
Mhm.
what is that we eat? And you see some people will go like, no, I'm not going to have that. They don't even start eating it, right? For whatever
Right.
reason. Maybe they don't like it. Maybe they're just like, look, you know, like you said, we now have things today that we didn't have many moons ago. For
Mhm.
instance, commercials that challenge you to eat just one, like, but you can't
Yeah.
just eat one, right? And then you eat the whole can of Pringles, right? And
Mhm.
you're like, I guess they were right, right? But now you're fat
Yeah.
anyway. So let's continue.
Groups of
Mhm.
people, certain ethnicities, perhaps certain genetic subtypes, where the time you eat matters. But for the most part, the majority of people, what you eat matters. It's what you put in, and that's what really matters.
Do you think there's been enough studies, enough research done on IF to be able to make some of those clear assessments?
I think there's been enough studies to show that there is no one diet that can solve them all.
So
And I think that what we should do is not get so stuck on the type of diet,
Okay.
but start talking about food. And food deserts are real. People can't afford healthy food. People don't know how to make affordable food for their families. That's a much better conversation than, is it 16 hours on or 8 hours off, 2 days on, 5 days off. And I've seen some dangerous eating patterns when people get stuck with those habits and they're neglecting calories. I've seen people actually eating too little. And this is one pearl. The people in that 20,000 found that they had less muscle mass. That just tells you they're probably not getting the right amounts of protein
That's
and
right.
macronutrients, which is very important.
So important, so interesting. Dr. Patel, come back anytime because we will have
That's
that
right.
conversation.
Yeah.
As you
Okay.
know.
So
Thank you.
I really liked what she said there at the end in particular because when people neglect calories, like it's important for people if they're overweight or if they have goals to lose weight that they get in a
Mhm.
caloric deficit because that's the only way you're going to lose weight. But that being said, you want to moderate the rate at which you're losing weight
Right.
because, as she said, muscle mass is very, very important, right? So we know that as people get older, they tend to lose muscle mass because people develop what's called anabolic resistance, where you need a higher threshold of protein in order to trigger muscle protein synthesis so that way you can grow and stimulate lean muscle mass. And as you get older, actually, what's very, very important is overall grip strength for mortality. I mean, there's just study after study after study where people who have poor grip strength actually have a very, very low overall or have much higher mortality than people who have a higher grip strength. So that's why it's important as you get older to eat more protein. You can't go
Mhm.
without protein, and you should kind of prioritize that in your diet, at least in my opinion, to maintain muscle mass and also help with satiety. And when you do intermittent fasting, chances are you're not going to be eating as much because you're narrowing your window. But also at the same time, if you're narrowing your window, but then as soon as you start eating, you just go on an all-out binge. Okay, well that's a problem too. Once again,
Right.
there's no silver bullet when it comes to nutrition, but we should try to prioritize people's overall longevity by in my opinion, getting lean meats, lots of fruits and vegetables. And then, if you want, you could still have a candy bar or ice cream when you're out with your family or something like that. But that should be the centerfold of your diet. The centerfold of
Right.
your diet should be lean proteins, fruits and vegetables. I mean, that right there, you're going to be pretty good right there.
Right. And the joke I like to say is like, doctors will tell you all the time, stop eating Oreos, stop eating potato chips, but you've like never heard a doctor say, hey, you know what? You need to cut down on your broccoli consumption because it's harming your health. Not to say that it can't,
Mhm.
but just like doctors don't say that because the likelihood that eating too much the likelihood of you eating too much broccoli, or carrots, is pretty low,
Right.
right? Like so low that you don't really got to worry about it. Like you don't like
Right.
unless you're doing something very specific, you don't even need to measure. You can just
Yeah.
freely eat from the broccoli pile if you want, freely eat
Right.
carrots. Now, I mean, you can overdo it. I mean, like, I think Steve Jobs did it at one point. Like, they said he ate so many carrots that his skin turned orange. I think it was Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And he had some pretty bizarre habits
Mhm.
that people speculated might have
Mhm.
led to what caused him to die.
Mhm.
I think at one point he was like a fruitarian or something like that, where he like
Mhm.
only ate fruit or something weird.
Right. Well, being a
Um,
fruitarian, you would get no protein, and that's the
right.
large problem with that.
And so,
And
like, there are weird, bizarre things that you can do, but overall,
yeah, most people aren't going to fall into that
right,
category. And like I said, it's important that you kind of look at what's going to work best for you, and this has to be very, very personal. Um, but the comparison I like to do a lot when it comes to like considering calories, processed foods, and how like volumes of food may affect your satiety. If you look at like a regular can of Coke, that's about 140 calories. Okay, well,
mhm,
140 calories of strawberries is literally a pound of strawberries. So imagine, eating a pound of strawberries versus drinking a Coke. What do you think is
right,
going to be more satiating and what's going to be overall better for you? Now, where
right,
people may go wrong with this is that like high fructose corn syrup actually isn't inherently bad for you. The problem with it is it's the same problem that seed oils have, is that they add a lot of calories without any extra nutrients or satiety. That's their problem. So, like, if you can moderate your intake of high fructose corn syrup or, seed oils in large amounts, then okay, it's probably not bad for you. But the problem is, it's going to be very difficult to do that. Therefore, it's probably a good idea for most people to like be mindful of your consumption of those things. Or if
right,
you're me personally, I don't drink anything with high fructose corn syrup because once again, I don't think it's conductive to my diet or my goals because
right,
it's a lot of unnecessary calories that I'm not going to get anything from. I drink
right,
diet pop, artificially sweetened stuff, or you can even use natural sweeteners if you have an aversion to that kind of stuff. But like, you shouldn't think that these things are inherently bad because once again, the data actually doesn't support that. There's a great article from somebody that I follow quite a bit, named Lane Norton. If you look up BioLane, I think it's BioLane, how sugar did not, or why sugar did not cause the obesity epidemic. There's an article with tons and tons and tons of resources on what I'm talking about in particular. And I think it's important for people to parse that out because I don't think we should unnecessarily demonize foods because another thing that kind of can lead people astray and down a bad path is the associations with like calling foods morally bad because you have a negative association with them when they're actually not bad. Because what happens with a lot of people is that they have a disinhibition response where they actually may tend to binge because they have hard rules around food. So, like, in my opinion, I think people should have like guidelines like, hey, try to avoid processed sugars, try to avoid something laden with a ton of fats, try to avoid saturated fat, but don't make that like a hard rule because what tends to happen is that people will binge once they kind of break
mhm,
those rules because they say, all right, well, I already screwed up a little bit, so I might as well screw up a lot and then we'll just go, we'll worry about it tomorrow. Well, no, you should just say, okay, well, I'm off the plan for tonight, enjoying something with my wife, my girlfriend, or whatever, and then we're back on it next meal. That's kind of the perspective that I think people should have because I think that's going to keep them from making hard mistakes or making
right,
ridiculous moral guidelines around food because I don't think that's healthy because food isn't a moral thing.
right. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember a lot this morning. I think it was. I want to say it was Mark Lobliner that I saw a video
Mhm.
of, and I could be wrong, but I think he said something like it was something to the effect of not having a cheat day, but building it into your dietary plan.
Yes, you
Like,
should.
it's
That's
not like,
absolutely a
"Oh,
great point.
I'm cheating and I'm
Mhm.
having this ice cream today." It's like, "No, I'm having the occasional ice cream because
Mhm.
it's okay to have the occasional ice cream, but the primary focus of how I'm eating is this way, and that's what
Right.
I'm gonna focus on." Rather, because 'cause I've never really been much for the whole cheat day, and
Yeah.
in some dietary patterns, there's no such thing. Like, if you're trying to do keto, there really isn't a cheat day because it's
Mhm.
like a cheat week, because you get kicked out of ketosis, then you gotta get back into it, and it can be a challenge,
Right.
so on and so forth, right? So to me, the whole idea of a cheat day is just, like, lazy thinking
Mhm.
rather than just saying, "Let me build this plan into it." Like, yeah, I'm gonna
Right.
like, we have friends come over almost every Friday night.
Mhm.
Okay, so Friday nights, tends to be the night that we have pizza more often, or something along that line, right?
Mhm.
And we have more chips and things out, I might drink a little bit more, and I don't, again, like I'm a 3 glass, like, ooh, that's going to hit me hard tomorrow kind of
Yeah.
guy. So, so it's not like I'm getting wasted or anything like
Mhm.
that. It's, just that part of my plan. Like, I know it's Friday. This is
Right.
what I do. It's not Friday, right? Like, it's Thursday. So, I'm not going to have all these snacks and things, so I think it's better. We're better off thinking in terms of, like, what is my plan and how do I
Mhm.
generally want to eat? And I think part of that reflects once upon a time, food was scarce.
Right.
So you took what you could get. Well, now
Mhm.
food isn't scarce.
Right.
And I think that's part of the problem is that we don't have a scarcity. So people can easily overeat, especially with the types of foods, again, as we discussed a
Yes.
moment ago, right? So it's a lot easier to overeat. Um, and for some people, it turns into, becoming fat. And as I like to tell people, like other people, maybe they get cancer, right? Like, or
Mhm.
some other disease that's not as visible, right? From their behaviors, not
Right.
again, not from having too many chips one night, but
Mhm.
maybe you ate too much processed food over time, and
Right.
then your body, as opposed to getting fat, instead got cancer, right? Like, or something else, right? Some other, maybe you ended up with diabetes or what have you. And so I think that is really a long, over time, your
Mhm.
behavior, which is why you need to be more consistent and therefore
Right.
not have cheat days, which, as you said, can
Mhm.
lead you to overdo it.
Right. Yeah. And one thing that I like that you kind of brought up there earlier is kind of like planning it in. And this is exactly what I do. When it comes to, like, let's say my wife and I want to go to the Cheesecake Factory or something like that, then absolutely, throughout the week, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to be mindful of my choices throughout the week. And then the day of, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to build my day around this dinner. Where, like, okay,
Right.
yeah, maybe a little bit more hungry in the morning. I may have like a smaller breakfast or like a smaller
Right.
lunch or just be very, very scarce on my calories throughout the day. But then I realized, hey, later on, I'm going to really enjoy that, piece of cheesecake with my
Right.
wife. And, we're going to eat a pretty big dinner. It's going to be awesome. That's really, really smart. And Alan Aragon is somebody that I think a lot of people should follow if you're interested in this kind of topic, because he's a really, really intelligent researcher on a lot of this stuff. And I know he's published a bunch of studies and talks about a lot of this stuff, but he calls it like a planned hedonic deviation, which kind of sounds
Mhm.
bad because I know a lot of people have a negative connotation with hedonism, as they kind of rightfully should. But
Right.
if you have like this, mindset of like, hey, I'm going to do this consciously and I'm going to enjoy it, and that's going to be that. I think it's a lot better of a perspective than like, oh, I'm going to abstain, 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 and then like, you try so hard, but then everybody does it. It's perfectly okay. Even me. I mean, somebody that's lost 70 pounds and completely changed their life by losing weight. Um, I still have trouble maintaining my diet 100% of the time.
Mhm.
So if you're at least mindful of it and you can plan for it, then I think you're a lot further ahead than just saying, I'm not going to cheat no matter what. And then you're like, oh my God, I got to have this piece of cheesecake, ice cream. I'm going to down 62 beers and I'm never going to do it again. No, just understand like, hey, I'm going to take a little deviation here and we're right back to it. I think that's the most productive way that you can kind of have, um, you know, junk food, if you will, which I really
Right.
don't call a lot junk food. Like for me, it's more of a spectrum where like you're gonna have foods that are like more enjoyable and less
Mhm.
satiating, and you're gonna have foods that are probably a little bit less enjoyable and more satiating. Where like I enjoy eating broccoli and Brussels sprouts, but they're not as they're not as tasty as ice cream or a
Right.
burger with all these toppings or ribs smothered in barbecue sauce. But I could still fit both into my diet. It's just which one
Right.
is going to be more you know is going to be more likely to produce the goals that you want.
Right. Absolutely. And I think I think there's a value in people just recognizing what works for them and what doesn't. So for
Right.
instance, for like you were talking about, like, hey, if I know I'm going to go out with my wife to the Cheesecake Factory on the day of,
Mhm.
maybe I take it a little easy on sugars or carbs or whatever it is that you're taking it easy on.
Mhm.
I do similar. So for instance, I have found for me personally, keeping all of my sugar intake down to about 20 grams or less really, really works for me.
Good.
And we're not going to get into all the things that I've observed because I feel like it's a little bit on the personal side, but
Mhm.
like cognition and some other things,
Sure.
I think I've even noticed dental improvements and stuff like that. So for me, it works for me. And in
Mhm.
my opinion, there's not really a huge downside keeping that limit. So if I want a piece of cheesecake, which by the way is one of my favorite cakes of all,
Yes.
my favorite desserts of all
Absolutely.
time, right? I love just a plain cheesecake. No toppings, none of that. Just don't ruin it. No swirly stuff inside of it. Don't be handing me no blueberry cheesecake, okay?
Right.
All right. We're not getting sacrilegious. Just a regular plain old cheesecake. I love cheesecake. And sometimes I'll be like, all right, I know I'm gonna have, we're going out tonight and I know the place has cheesecake and I want some of that cheesecake because I like it. So I'll do the same thing. I'll be like, all right, well, no sugars at all, no carbs at all day long, right? So that I can maintain some semblance of what I'm aiming for. So even if I do overeat, when I say overeat, I mean like if I eat more than 20 grams of sugar, which I probably will from a piece of cheesecake, then at least it doesn't compound on everything that I ate all day long, right? Which would make me feel worse over the long run. And so I'm just simply planning ahead and saying, all right, look, this is what I want. And there's a little bit of flexibility there because,
Right.
the sliver of cheesecake would have to be really tiny to keep within 20 grams of sugar. So, I think it's just being mindful and kind of keeping in your head a plan in order to maintain what your goal is.
Right.
I mean, it sounds simple, but it is a challenge.
Mhm.
All right, so
Yeah.
let's get to this. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
All right. So let's get to this because I want to point out some stuff because we're going to talk about what you people can learn from reading. So let's see if I can do it like, nope, that wasn't it. Why does it not do it? This stupid thing. There. All right. You know what? I noticed that. Oh, I see what's going on. One of the views that I have does not show up until I put something on the screen. And if I navigate away to a different view, then that view goes away and I have to, okay, so I see what's going on here. Learning how to use my stuff. Real time. All right. 8 hours. So this is the press release that they were talking about in the video. We're not going to read through it all. 8-hour time restricted eating linked to 91% higher risk of cardiovascular health. And this is from the Heart Association. So this is like the newsroom.heart.org. So where we go here. So editor's note, we can just read these and then we're going to jump over to the actual presentation that they gave. The research authors have shared their full poster presentation for updated details about their research abstract. Please see the digital file attached under additional resources below for these details. I sure did. The most current statistics reviewed and confirmed by the research authors are in the poster. Please see the digital file attached. Okay, I did. As with any new scientific development, patients should always consult with their doctor prior to making changes to their health regimens. Okay, agree with that. No issues there. Highlights. Over 20,000 adults. Now, this sounds impressive because one of my biggest criticisms of like a new study is you look at the new study and there's like, we checked out 300 people. And I'm like, that's not very many.
Right.
And, depending on what it is, it could be like, if it's like 300 people with a rare disease, well, then maybe that's a lot, right? Because how many people actually have the disease. So in terms of the numbers of people that they have, that may be the best that they can get. Or if it's just 300 people overall for heart disease, well, that's tiny, right? So 20,000 sounds like a lot, but we're going to get to that, folks, because I think there's some big problems that weren't even mentioned in any previous information that we've covered so far. People with heart disease or cancer also had an increased risk of cardiovascular death. I think that's fair to say, all right, if you have a disease, then you really need to be careful about what you're doing because you may need special precautions to not make your disease worse for any number of reasons. Compared with the standard schedule of eating across 12 to 16 hours per day, I think this statement is a little bit misleading, actually. So let's jump over that. Let's take a look at their PowerPoint. All right. I might have to see if I can't get it. Okay. I won't be able to get it all in with all the words so that everybody can read it.
I can see that pretty clear.
Additional information from the research authors. Thank you for your interest in findings from this poster. You're very welcome. Use of this poster without permission is prohibited. Too bad. Please keep in mind that these findings are preliminary and have not been peer reviewed. Totally get it. But even peer reviewed information can be garbage. Interpreting or reporting these facts should be extremely careful. That's okay. So that's not a complete sentence. Okay. Anyway, there are certain limitations from this observational study. Okay. I am taking an issue with this word study. But we'll get to that. The average 2-day dietary recalls may not accurately estimate at usual eating duration, self-reported data are prone to measurement errors. Residual confounding cannot be ruled out. Importantly, the link between 8-hour eating duration and cardiovascular mortality is an association, not a causal relationship. And this positive link still needs replication in other studies. We recommend that you wait on reporting until the peer review paper is published.
And
So
that's
not
exactly,
like,
yeah.
all these media outlets they failed. The first thing that at least Victor here said, Victor is the guy from the study, and I'm not going to pull it up in the picture. He looks like he's 12. But whatever. So like, I don't know how many times, Kyle, I have seen a report in a news article, multiple news articles. They'll report it. I'll go dig up the study, and they will say the exact same thing. They will say, well, you should probably wait until we do further research.
Right.
This was just, or the worst one is, this study should not be taken to mean this. And then news
Oh,
outlets
yeah.
will do the exact opposite. Oh, well, this study proves this. And I'm like, the authors literally said, don't present it like this. And you literally went against what the authors already acknowledged was not an appropriate assessment of their study. Like,
Yeah.
it's bizarre.
It's insanely irresponsible to do stuff like this. And I like that he said that it's not a causal relationship, because that's actually very important. So in order for us to kind of understand something, if we're saying that intermittent fasting raises your risk for cardiovascular disease, then there has to be some kind of mechanism, because all it is changing the amount of food that you eat in a day.
Right.
So in my understanding of literature is there's no causal relationship between those two. There is a very, very strong and causal relationship between LDL cholesterol over a lifetime and cardiovascular disease. But as far as I know, there's no causal relationship between just fasting and cardiovascular disease. And then, like I said, it's just insanely irresponsible to run with that kind of headline, throw it out there when they specifically say this is not like meant to be a causal link. And literally the headline says, new study finds 91% risk of increased cardiovascular disease from intermittent fasting. Like, it's insane to me that these people have been taken to task and, if not downright sued for, what is it, false advertising, or, just blatantly misrepresenting someone's data.
Right. All right. So now again, this was a presentation. So we're going to zoom in on this a little bit. And so we're going to skip over all the numbers and data, because that's not what we're going to do at 7 a.m. in the morning, is try to do a whole bunch of intricate
It's a
math.
slog to read this kind of stuff.
Right. Not that it isn't valuable. Okay, folks. It's just that the goal here is to show you what you can learn just by reading like words and to understand things. So the first thing that we've learned is that the author does not believe that this should have been thrown out there in headlines like it was. Okay, so that's the first thing. The author also acknowledges on the first page there that there are some limitations, and so it's unclear to me what the author's intent was in even presenting this. I'm really unclear. But under methods, whenever I read a study, three things that I read the abstract, I read the conclusions, I read the methods, that, and that will include like definitions and stuff like that. Because that's very important, because a lot of times things will be classified in ways that, that we would not recognize. So for an example, one time I was having an argument with somebody about whether or not, the impact of spanking your kids. And we're not going to get into the details of that topic per se, but just to make a point, they were like, well, this study proves that spanking, harms your kids. And so I was like, okay, well, let me read the study. And I read the study, and in the study, they define things like biting your child and some other things as part of spanking. So they kind of categorize it. And I was like, well, most people, number one, don't bite their child on a regular basis. Number two, usually when they do bite their child, it's in response to the child biting, right? So it's not really used in the same way as like a spank would be. And so I was like, I don't think you can put these in the same category, to come to a conclusion. I think you got to look at them entirely separately because of how they're actually used when they're used. Like some parents do spank their kids if they tell a lie, draw on the wall, all these other things. I don't think I've ever heard of a parent who's like, you drew on the wall, come over here and give me your arm, and they bite it. Right? Like that just doesn't happen.
Right.
But if the child bites you, then they bite him back. So I look and I say, there is a clear, distinct difference, right? So I think it's worth understanding, how did the study put itself together? you know what kind of people did they use? What definitions might they have used that you may not, that you might find as an impact to the end result? And so, the methods, the conclusion, and not in this order, but the abstract, the methods, and the conclusion. But even if you only read the abstract and the conclusion, you can still gain a lot of insight. But I do recommend, if you're going to read a study, to at least dig into the method. And I have learned so much, and I've never touched the math ever. And in some cases, the math is way too lofty for me. Like I didn't take that level of courses in high school, and I didn't go on to college, so I wouldn't be able to do it anyway.
Right.
And I imagine that many people, they're not going to be able to do the math. And in most cases, in many cases, you can't do the math. You can't challenge their math unless you have access to the original data in the first place.
Right.
So you can just learn a lot from reading. So we're looking here at the methods, and what sticks out to me is, and I'm going to zoom in so that you can definitely, so everybody can read it. I want to zoom in on something here. So here is the data, and this is why I have an issue with the study. So they went and they pulled information from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey from 2003 to 2018. So that included, it looks like 43,000 people, for which they, I think they extracted and reduced it down to about 20,000 or so.
Right.
Then they compared it to the National Death Index through December 31st, 2019. So it's effectively two different groups of people, because we don't know how many, at least I'm not seeing anything here that says we cross-referenced the people from one survey to this death index to ensure that everybody that answered from the survey was also somebody that died, right? So, or somebody that didn't die, and make sure that they know, okay, here are the people that responded to this survey. Of those people, here is how many died, and here's how many that didn't die, specifically from that survey, right? So out of the 20,000, or 43,000, what's up, buddy? My producer's here. How many actually are represented in that death index? Well, I don't know. And so it seems suspect, because it's almost a spurious correlation, right? Like
Yeah.
you're like, okay, well, this happened and this happened. Like I read somewhere, like more people drowned after eating ice cream. Well, that's a nice correlation.
Yeah.
Why?
There's
More
yeah.
people eat ice cream in the summer when they also go swimming.
Yeah, there's a website called Spurious Correlations, and I believe one of them was like Nicolas Cage movies and people that like die by bed sheets or something like that.
Right.
And they're like 100% correlated. It's hysterical, but obviously there's no causal relationship here.
Right.
So now I assume you're going to get into this, but like the exclusion criteria is pretty interesting. So like when they talk about extreme energy intake, over 800 calories and under 8,000 calories for for men, I think, and then for women it's under or over 600 calories and under 6,000 calories. Okay, well, I mean, that is a huge gap. So like for me, right, I'm an active dude, 5'11", a little over 200 pounds, and I can lift a lot of weight. I mean, my record deadlift is 545 pounds, squat 400 pounds, bench over 300 pounds. For me, my maintenance calories per day, mid, is about 2,800 calories. That's actually, like, you would think mine would be super high as a very, very active person who works an active job and is very physically active. It's not that much. So someone who has a lot less muscle mass than me, their average, caloric maintenance is going to be around 2,500 calories, maybe.
Yeah.
So somebody that's eating even 3,500 calories a day for an extended period of time, that's in a pretty big, caloric surplus of 1,000 calories a day. If we're just talking about averages for women, theirs is like 2,000 to 2,200. So if we're talking about like under 6,000 calories, if someone's eating 5,000 calories a day for an extended period of time, you're going to get pretty big pretty fast. And this kind of goes to like the genetic component of like different races of different people will have different personal fat thresholds where their body can no longer accept the fat that's coming in, and therefore they get into what's called insulin resistance, where their fat cells no longer accept the fat that's coming in, and it goes to their viscera surrounding their organs and leads to a lot of health complications. For like Asians, that personal fat threshold's a lot lower than maybe it is for like Europeans. Black people may have a little bit of a different personal fat threshold depending on what region of Africa they may have came from. I mean, there's a lot of just variables in this kind of stuff. So when you just look at like numbers in a vacuum, there's too many variables to really draw out a specific thing. Now, like I said earlier, with the Mendelian randomization trials, that's a little bit different. But like for this kind of stuff, when you're just looking at overall numbers and number of people who do fasting and stuff like that without tightly controlling for their calories, this can get pretty loose, and you may not be able to interpret like good information from this.
Right. And I want to point out, because basically what they're doing here is they're saying, all right, who did we exclude? We exclude anybody that's eating, any man that's eating less than 800 calories a day, and any man that's eating more than 8,000. And as you pointed out, 8,000 is an extraordinary amount. For reference, and I believe I'm going to remember this accurately, Michael Phelps, the swimmer, there was like an article that was like, he eats 12,000 calories a day, but he swims for like 6 hours a day. Right. Like, so yeah, I mean, if you're actively swimming for 6 hours a day, and presumably he's practicing like he competes, which means he's not just in the pool floating around, he's like actively swimming. And I don't know that it's exactly like every minute of that 6 hours is swimming, but he's putting in a lot more. He's utilizing a lot more energy, way more. And he eats 12,000 calories. Like, well, that might make sense for somebody like Michael Phelps, right? Even, and I know that people don't necessarily like him, but Lance Armstrong would cycle for like 6 hours a day, right? Like, so these extreme athletes are, that will eat somewhere between 8 and 12,000 calories a day, are also actively, like, you might
They're
also
high
think of this,
performers.
right. They're high performers. They're almost like competing for like 6 hours a day to train, right? They're training in a way like I can tell you right now, I probably would not last, well, for swimming purposes, I probably wouldn't last 10 minutes of any part of Michael Phelps' regimen. For Lance Armstrong, maybe a half an hour, right? Like when he was, because like the level that they're training and performing at is extremely high and putting a lot of demands on the body. So the idea that you were going to exclude anybody that's over 8,000 is bizarre, because the general recommendation is about 2,000, right? Like that's the general recommendation, like 2,000. So like, okay, you can be almost up to 4 times the general recommendation, and we're going to include you in this study.
Right.
I think that's way too broad. Way
Exactly.
too broad. And then under 800, um, I don't know. I have no concept of a lower threshold, but I would assume that 800 is too low itself. I would assume that maybe even 1,000 calories is generally too low. Unless you've got some really weird specific thing that you're doing, that you're working with your health provider on. I would say a proper range probably would have been 1,500 to 2,500 if I was taking a stab. And that would have been a little bit more accurate. Probably still, not telling to many people, because how many people eat way more than 2,500 anyway, right? So I don't know how useful that's going to be to typical people. So I'm not. I think some of the exclusion here was just, it wasn't narrow enough. It was too wide. But they ended up getting 20,078 people out of the 43,849. And then again, the question is, and I don't know because it doesn't really say here, but the question is, did they match up the people from the survey to the death index? Now, not all of them would have been, because I mean, hopefully not all of them would have died, but you kind of need to have, okay, here are the ones that survived. Here are the ones that didn't survive. What's the difference? What's going on here? Why did some survive? Why did some not survive? Right. And with a range of 800 to 8,000, well, I mean, the calorie intake could have been a huge factor. But
Yes.
again, we don't know. So this goes toward, when you read something, you can just learn a lot by reading it and saying, well, that just seems a little bit odd. And I'm not, like Kyle sounds pretty smart here with all these fancy words that I'm not familiar with, but I'm just a regular guy. And I'm like, hey, 8,000 calories. I remember one time when they were talking about Michael Phelps ate 12,000. That seems crazy. Who eats 8,000 calories a day? Like, is that really, I mean, probably a lot of people, but I mean, is that really a good thing? Going down here, I don't know that there was a whole lot to learn from this particular graph, which just kind of breaks down, and it says, all right, so here's what they did was they said, here's the eating duration. So their reference group, they remove anybody that was not within the 12 to 16 hour time frame for intermittent fasting. I'm fine with that. That's fine. You got to narrow it down some way. That seems to be the more spoke about range that I see. Although intermittent fasting there's all kind of, you can do it daily. You can do it 5 days on, 2 days off, 2 days on, 5 days off. There's like a bazillion different ways that you can do it. And then they narrow it down between all cause of death, cardiovascular death, and cancer death. So I think that just looking at the methods provides you a big clue that this study probably not so useful, and you don't have to have a bunch of letters behind your name. Beyond that, they got the funding disclosure. I don't know. What do you think about funding? And just like, I think it's nice that they put it in there, but I'm like, I don't really.
I believe they
I don't
have
care.
to I believe they have to disclose where their funding's from,
Right.
but I think a lot of people, kind of like I said, I think when we first started that, like, people will kind of bake in a lot of their bias when it comes to this kind of stuff. So like they'll say, oh, well, let's say if the Beef Cattlemen's Association or something like that pays for a study on, like, let's say protein, then they're going to say, oh, well, of course they're going to find positive findings because they funded it. Okay, so like I mentioned Lane Norton earlier, and he did a study in mice where they basically fed the mice different kinds of proteins and tried to see like what their muscle development was like over a course of a certain period of time. And what they found is that actually, I think it was egg protein that had the greatest leucine response, or the greatest muscle protein synthesis response in mice. So what they would do is like feed them every couple hours. Like this mouse would get wheat protein, this mouse would get like whey, this mouse would get egg, this mouse would get beef. And what they found is that I think it was either like egg or whey had the greatest muscle protein synthesis response. And the Egg and Dairy Council and like the Beef Cattlemen's Association, I think, paid for this study. Well, people say, oh, well, your foundings are compromised on that. Well, maybe, but at the same time, like, you have to look at the methods and determine from there, which is, it's not easy to do. But just because somebody paid for a study doesn't mean that like it's compromised in that respect. So I had Alan Flanagan on my show, and I'm trying to get him on again. It's been a little bit difficult to schedule because he lives in Ireland. But when I had him on my show last, he said, like, man, I wish nutrition was overfunded, but he's like, we're like dying out here for money for research and studies and stuff like that. Like, it's not easy to get funding. So typically the companies who want to find out about stuff is safe or not, well, yeah, of course they're going to fund it. So like, let's say there's a company that wants to do research on beta alanine, which is an amino acid they put in, like, that's a frequently found supplement that they put in like pre-workouts, stuff like that. Okay, well, somebody who makes beta alanine is probably going to be more likely to fund that research because they want to know, hey, does this stuff work? Same deal with like creatine, amino acids, and stuff like that. The supplement companies typically will kind of get funds together to pay for research to either support or not support their findings. And my understanding is Mike Matthews, who runs Muscle for Life, he has paid through his company Legion for a lot of studies because he wants to sell good supplements. and could you say that compromised the findings? Maybe, but I don't think that's really a good argument. I think it's a little bit silly, and I think people just kind of do that to lazily dismiss data they don't
Right.
like.
Right. And the other thing is like if that's your go-to, like who funded it,
Mhm.
then that yeah, if that's your first response, then that kind of tells me like, yeah, you didn't really watch. I mean, I'm
Well, not
sorry,
only that,
you didn't really read it. So
it
you
says
don't
more
even
about the
know.
person making the accusation than
Right.
the people actually doing the study.
Right. And I think that people should, if they're interested in it in the first place, they should
Mhm.
read it, right?
Yes.
And then I think you compare it to what other studies say and say, what is the difference? Okay, this study over here says, this thing is really, really healthy for you. This study over here says it's really, really terrible for you. A few studies suggest that maybe it is, maybe it isn't, depends on these different factors. So read through them all and identify, what you believe is the case, because all three of like all three categories of studies, one that says very good, one that says very bad, one that says in between, they could all have value to them,
Hmm.
right? And but you're more easily hoodwinked if you're just like, oh well, the funding came from the CCP, so of course they would say that about Americans,
Right.
why they want us to all die, right?
Right.
Like you just come to absurd conclusions.
Mhm.
And it's so I don't really care. Like I think it's nice that they do it, and I think it's a good thing.
Right.
Because I do think it does play a role,
Mhm.
but I don't think it matters nearly as much as people like to pretend. I think they're just like you said, they're being lazy.
Mhm.
Let's see what else is there. I think that was really all that I really wanted to go through this. I think that was the bigger thing. Summary of conclusions here. So let's zoom out a little bit so we can try to get the words all on the screen here. 8-hour TRE, which was where
Time
did they
restricted
define?
eating.
Yeah, time restricted eating was not associated with all cause mortality compared with eating duration of 12 to 16 hours. Sorry, folks, I'm trying to scoot back and forth here. Maybe just zoom in a little bit more there. I think that'll work. Um, it was significantly associated with higher risk of cardiovascular mortality in the general population, people, as well as people with CVD, so cardiovascular disease or cancer. Come on, I'm trying to. So difficult. Eating duration of greater than 16 hours per day was associated with lower risk of cancer mortality in people with cancer. So if you don't even have cancer, then
Mhm.
not really relevant to you. These findings require replication, but do not support long-term use of 8-hour TRE for prevention of cardiovascular death, nor for longevity. I don't think, I think there's a conflicting statement there. It's like they require replication. Well, yeah, right. You need to falsify it,
Mhm.
but until you falsify it, until multiple studies show this, then no, you can't say that, these results don't support it. Like
Right.
the results only suggest maybe
Right.
that there is more to be learned about something that we thought we knew, which is always the case,
Mhm.
right? And that would be a fair assessment. But to say that it doesn't support it, I don't think that's the case. The other thing that I don't like about this, um, and maybe you can shine some light on it because you seem
Sure.
like a pretty smart guy.
Scene.
This wasn't a study that was done specifically for this. This was,
Mhm.
and this is why I have a problem with the word study, because when I think of study, I think of somebody that sits down and they have a hypothesis and they say, all right, how am I going to go and review how am I going to construct um, something specific to evaluate this hypothesis? Well, I'm going to need 20,000 people at least. I'm going to need this. I'm going to need this. I'm going to need this. And so then they go and they set it up, right? Whereas here, it seems like they just said, all right, I'm going to grab this piece of information, and then I'm going to
Mhm.
compare the two and see what I come to. I don't really call that a study. I call that just like an analysis, right?
Yeah.
You're
So.
analyzing data that already existed, but you didn't specifically go out and set up a situation
Right.
for that purpose. You didn't say, all right, I'm going to go out and try to get as many people as I can to examine a survey.
Mhm.
And I'm going to construct this survey specifically because I'm trying to identify something, about this hypothesis here.
Mhm.
You took a survey that already existed, which may not have, it may have had extraneous information in the
Mhm.
questions. It may have not had questions that needed to be in there,
Mhm.
right? And then you compare it against the death index, which doesn't tell you like as far
It
again as far
doesn't
as
give the full picture.
right at all. It doesn't even come close. So it
Mhm.
just seems like we wasted everybody's time on this.
No. I don't think so. I think there's a lot of
Not we,
insight
but I
here.
mean like
Oh,
we
they
as a
did. Yeah.
society.
Um, Yeah, so like I guess one little rebuttal would be that like when it comes to doing nutritional studies, I think they're very, very useful, but they shouldn't be taken as gospel. So like
Mhm.
in this situation, you can't have a 20-year randomized controlled trial or like a 20-year study of putting people in food jail and comparing them, what their overall cardiovascular mortality outcomes are, by doing this because who's going to sit there and say, okay, well, for 20 years, I'm going to have somebody prepare every single ounce of food that I ever eat,
Right.
to be controlled because nobody is going to, first of all, comply with that. And nobody's going to have the funding to do something like that. So, like, when it comes to analysis like this, which I would say more accurately describes this, that's kind of what, like, the best you could hope for. And this is kind of
Okay.
like I said with the Mendelian randomization trials, that, like, you're not necessarily doing a study, you're kind of analyzing people who have the same, phenotypes and
Right.
monitoring them over a lifetime. So like that's where epidemiology is very, very strong. Now, when you want to monitor, like let's say blood lipid profiles, you could do a little bit more of like a randomized control trial where like one of the ones I think of and refer to often when it comes to like seed oils is they had the infamous muffin study where what they did is they made two sets of muffins and had two groups of people where they actually tightly controlled their calories and fed them a muffin that had, palm kernel oil, which is saturated fat, and then
Mhm.
another one that had like canola oil. And what they found is that over the course of the studies, that the people who had the ones with palm kernel oil actually had worse blood lipid profiles with a higher LDL than people who had the canola oil ones who had a lower LDL. So you're able to control it in that regard. But when it
Right.
comes to like, these large cohorts, it's hard to control 20,000 people and tell
Right.
them like you're going to follow this specific diet profile. The best
Right.
you could do is just kind of say like, hey, food frequency questionnaires, what do your blood lipid profiles look like if you submitted to something like that, like just to do these tightly controlled nutritional studies. As Lane Norton always says, the main reason why these studies don't get done: money, money, money.
Right.
Because
And
we're not flooding with money for this kind of
right.
stuff.
And 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 I think in fairness, part of my criticism is that
Mhm.
in the in the field of research,
Mhm.
the term study might have a specific meaning that's very understood,
Yes,
right?
it's about an honest
Whereas
representation of the data.
colloquially, if
Mhm.
you tell somebody, man, a study proved this, right? If you just say that word, right?
Mhm.
I think most people are going to envision something more like the muffin study than
Yes.
saying, hey, I studied two
Mhm.
sets of data and this is the conclusion that I came up with, right?
Right.
And so I think people kind of naturally inclined to look at, and that's the core of my beef is like, I
Mhm.
feel like we need to use different words when we're talking in
Yeah.
professional fields than
Yeah.
necessarily in the public because words were like in the legal field, murder has a very specific meaning.
Yes.
In colloquially in everyday speech, people will be like, yeah, them two people got in a fight. He murdered that guy, right? Like we just use it very casually and very
Yeah.
loosely. And so I don't think it carries the same meaning. And I think
Mhm.
when there's that crossover from taking information from a professional setting and then putting it out into the public, I think there needs to, I don't know how you would accomplish it, but I think there needs to be some sort of buffering of the terms
Mhm.
or just just helping people understand the terminology
Mhm.
that they may not recognize that professionals do recognize. Because if I'm a PhD and I'm a researcher and you
Mhm.
tell me study, probably I understand it a lot better right off the bat
Yes.
than if I go to my neighbor and I say, man, this study just showed me this thing. My neighbor who
Mhm.
maybe works as an auto mechanic, right? And nothing against anybody, like any field, just if you're not in a field, words
Mhm.
mean something different to you. There's a
Yeah.
good chance.
Well, it's and this is something that I hit on my show a lot. It's just honest representation of data. and the way that things are. Because this, I think this is the point you're getting at, is that like when you say study, people assume, like you said, that they did some kind of project, or they, got people together and had
More
a certain
intentional than it maybe was.
right. They had an intervention that was meant to achieve a certain outcome or observe something to kind of share with people. This was more of just an analysis. Hey, we're
Right.
looking at these people with this certain criteria, and we're trying to observe what happened from here, where it wasn't necessarily like a direct diet intervention, kind of like the muffin study, where
Right.
we're giving people something to see what happens over a
And
period of
excluding
time.
certain things, and putting parameters
Exactly.
out there for
Yes.
people to follow, so that our study can narrow it down and say, based on
Mhm.
this criteria that we explicitly controlled for, this is what we've come up with.
Yes.
So, all right. Last thing I want to point out, I just want to show this up on the screen really, really quickly. I thought this was fun. So let me see if I can't get it up on the screen. There we go. I did a good job. So this comes from Stat News. I do like Stat News. A study says intermittent fasting is making people drop dead. Oh, come on. All right. I'm already intrigued, right? The news is everywhere in my social news feeds this morning. A popular fad diet is apparently lethal, scientific research says. Specifically, a study found that caloric restriction, also known as intermittent fasting, has a 91% higher risk of death due to cardiovascular disease. Except scientific research doesn't say that. And not only should you not be worried about this study, you shouldn't be wasting brain glucose thinking about it, even including that 91% number, which you'll remember caused me pain because I don't think this result should be remembered. This
Mm.
study is a type of nutritional research that is notoriously weak, and right now it's only available as a press release. It's not clear from the many, many news articles in the study whether reporters actually viewed the data that will be presented at an upcoming research meeting held by the American Heart Association.
Mm.
So, how am I, a science journalist, confidently dismissing this research? It's based on observational research, on one lesson from more than 20 years of reporting on health and medicine that should be very skeptical of observational research, especially when it is about nutrition. I'm not going to read the whole article. Just wanted to read that little snippet there because I thought it was kind of amusing. I always like it when somebody is a little bit on the snarky side. I think it's kind of fun. We
Yeah.
don't have nearly enough of it in a more professional sense, right? So I think that was a good article. I'll link it so people can read it, the entirety of it. Kyle, any final words before we get out of here?
No, I just appreciate you having me on. I know I did the Israel-Palestine debate with you a couple months back. I really enjoyed that. I really, really enjoyed this show in particular. I hope people got a lot of good information from it, and hopefully I was coherent and all that good stuff. And yeah, I guess I'll do my plugs. Well, you can find me at Kyle Matovick on Twitter. Last name is spelled Matovcick because I know it's a little bit tricky. I run the In Liberty and Health podcast, 5 till midnight, Cognitive Vigilance. And I play in a band called A Common Crown. So if you enjoy this kind of content, I talk about it a little bit, and I also do a lot of like libertarian stuff, foreign policy, and even religious stuff. I kind of dive into all sorts of topics on my show. So I would love to have your audience over there as well. And yeah, I appreciate your time, DL.
All right. Awesome. Hang backstage for just a second, Kyle, and we'll chit chat for a moment or two. Folks, I hope you enjoyed watching and found the episode informative and inspiring. I want you to be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern ish. I usually try to aim for 7 a.m., but sometimes things get a little bit behind. But anyway, for an informed discussion on politics and culture, make sure you are subscribed to my YouTube channel. Or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. Make sure you subscribe. And then while you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving a comment. Remember, finally, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great weekend. But for now, I'm